gentlemen, if you now go back 50 years, close your eyes, and imagine you are on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. I present Reverend Johnson.
I am happy to join with you today in that which will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon of light and of hope to millions of Negro slaves being seared in a flame of a withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro in America still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacle of segregation and the chain discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty amid a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro lives in a shameful corner of disgrace and dishonor, and we have come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, they were signing a promissory note that all Americans were to fall heir. That yes, black men as well as white men would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check that has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. We refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. So we have come here to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. And we also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off nor taking the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to lift our nation from the dark and desolate valleys of segregation to the sunlit paths of racial justice. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. The whirlwinds of revolt shall continue to shake the foundations of our nation till the bright day of freedom emerges. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro just needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. The whirlwinds of revolt shall continue to shake the foundations of our nation till the bright day of freedom emerges. But there is something that I must say to my people, which stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice, in our process of finding our rightful place. We must not be found guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and of hatred. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. And this marvelous new militancy which has so engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidence of their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is bound to our destiny. They have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must always make the pledge to march ahead. And I know there are those who are asking the double T's of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied. As long as the Negro is still the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality, we can never be satisfied. As long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one, we can never be satisfied. As long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only, we can never be satisfied. As long as the Negro cannot stay in the motels of the highways or the hotels of the cities, we can never be satisfied. As long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York feels he has nothing for which to vote, no, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you come from areas where your quest for freedom have left you staggered by the winds of police brutality, but continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi, go back to Louisiana, go back to Georgia, go back to Alabama, go back to the slums and the ghettos of the northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. For I say unto you today, my friends, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day that this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners, that they will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream today. I have a dream that even in Alabama, with its vicious racists, its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, that one day right there in Alabama, little white boys and white girls will be able to join hands with little black boys and black girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream that one day that even in the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of oppression, sweltering with the heat of injustice, one day will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and equality. I have a dream that one day that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. If a America is to become a great nation, this must be true. So let freedom ring from the bodacious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring not only from there, but from Stone Mountain of Georgia and from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village, from every hamlet, from every state, and from every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will all join hands and sing in the Negro spiritual bowl, free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last.